Welcome to Creep Time with Silas. This is the disturbing story of the model who ate her husband. So this is Omaima Ari. She was a 23-year-old Egyptian model who was living in Los Angeles in kind of the late 80s to the early 90s. By 1991, she marries 56-year-old Bill Nelson, who's a pilot in Los Angeles, and the abuse of this marriage starts almost instantly. She was subjected to physical abuse, she was repeatedly SA'd in her own home, and that is until one November night when she completely snaps and she ends up beating and stabbing Bill to death. She then starts to dismember the body and she starts to cook and boil it piece by piece, even going as far as to barbecue his ribs and reportedly eat them. She would later go on to receive a full life sentence and is deemed insane by the courts, where she appeals her parole repeatedly, but the judges believe that she is an indefinite threat to society. 3 of the most dangerous roads in America and why you should avoid them at all costs. Number 1. One of the most treacherous and terrifying roads sits on top of a Colorado mountain with a drop so steep you'd rather not look down it while driving. The road has no guardrails and very tight turns, meaning one wrong move could be your last. Number 2. This one is known as the Overseas Highway. It stretches from Miami all the way to Key West and goes for a full 545 miles. The prolonged ride over nothing but the ocean has proven to be both dangerous and anxiety-inducing, with an average of 108 people who die on this route every single year. Number 3. Although it kind of looks scenic at first, the back road of Highway 17 is filled with sharp blind spots and no light past sundown. But the real danger of this route that poses a fatal risk is actually the wildlife, as the mountain lions are known to jump directly from trees onto your car. 3 urban legends that turned out to be true. Number 1. In the 1980s, parents in Long Island terrified their children with the legend of Cropsey. He was a murderous man who lived beneath an abandoned school and would capture children. But it was later found that the old janitor of the school was still living on school grounds, and it's believed he was responsible for the disappearance of several kids, which made the legend of Cropsey true. Number 2. Charlie No Face was the terrifying legend of a featureless man who would roam the streets of Pittsburgh at night. But it was discovered that this man did exist. His name was Raymond Robinson. He was a very nice guy, and he only left his house at night as he feared his deformity would scare people. Number 3. Legend has it that an escaped asylum patient roams near the Fairfax County Bridge, where countless amounts of dead rabbits have been found. There wasn't any legitimacy to this legend until a couple drove through this bridge in the 1970s, only to find a man dressed as a bunny who threw an axe through their windshield before they got away. So a couple of days ago on live, somebody asked me if I've had any paranormal experiences, and I actually told a story that wasn't from me, it was from my brother while we were at my grandma's. This is a picture of her foyer. Just to give some familial context here, of me and my other siblings, my brother is the least theatrical, I guess. He doesn't tell stories, he doesn't embellish, he doesn't do stuff like this, which is why I fully believe this. So anyway, we're at my grandma's one night, I'm in the kitchen, he's in the TV room, and if you look to the left when you're in the TV room, this is exactly what you see. You see the foyer leading to the front door, and you see on the right the archway leading to the living room. Suddenly, he starts screaming and panicking, and he is yelling that there is an old man in the house who is in the living room. So what he said he saw was an old man dressed in white with long white hair peering from around this archway right here. But we flipped the house upside down. We never found anything. And to this day, my brother doesn't like to talk about this. So, in 1963, President JFK was assassinated, which gave way to a host of conspiracy theories, most of which we already know. But one of the only ones with camera footage that can verify its subject is the story of this woman, known as the Babushka Lady. Arguably, she was one of the closest spectators to actually see the assassination, and was even seen snapping pictures at the exact moment that JFK was hit. So naturally, the FBI wanted her eyewitness account, and they wanted that up-close camera footage, but she was never found, and no one seems to know who this woman was. There was a woman named Beverly Oliver who came forward who claimed that this was her, but she would have been 17 at the time, which doesn't really match up with the photos, and it's believed that she probably fabricated this story for 15 minutes of fame. But who the real Babushka Lady was remains an unknown, and why she's never come forward with the footage she captured has never been determined. Try to imagine a scenario where you're jumping out of a plane through the middle of the night in the rain. The mysterious case of D.B. Cooper is is what put this exact scenario on the map. On November 24th, 1971, a plane was hijacked by a mysterious unknown man going by Dan Cooper, otherwise known as DB Cooper. So while carrying a bomb on this plane, he demands that they land the plane, the FBI provides him $200,000 cash, 4 parachutes, and they refuel the plane. So of course, because he has hostages, they comply. So they provide him the money, the plane is refueled, and they are back in the air on the way to Mexico City per his instructions. But at some point after they take off, unannounced, DB Cooper grabs the parachute, grabs the money, and jumps out of the plane into the night sky, and he was never seen again. But most paratroopers weighed in on this and don't believe anyone could have survived this jump in these conditions. That being said, his body was never found, nor was the bulk of that money. I genuinely do not even care if this video does well. Can someone please just explain to me what these things are? If you can tag a scientist, or if you are a scientist, could you please weigh in here and just explain this to me? So if you look at these videos of them, they're just these long-legged white creatures. They're only captured at night on like garage camera footage, but they don't have extremities like a head or arms. But what freaks me out is that they're so consistent. All of these videos that come out of these, they all look the same. They're from different locations, but they're all kind of in the California area. Like, what is that? What is that? Okay, like, keep your eyes over to the right-hand side of this video. Look in the dark corner. Look at that. Like, what? There's no way that that's... Look at it again, magnified. Do you see that? Who's faking that? What? The only contextual tie-in that I found are these Native American carvings that do kind of show creatures that look like these, but these sculptures don't really have a lot of historical context to them, so I'm begging you for rational explanations here. Please, somebody weigh in, tell me what these things are. It's Christmas Eve, so I couldn't give up the chance to tell you a creepy Christmas story. And if you love Creep Time and you want longer content, make sure to check out my YouTube channel with the link in the bio. So we're pretty familiar with how the whole Santa situation works, right? I mean, we kind of get the gig. He comes down the chimney and he leaves us presents. But around the holiday season in 2015, a California home got an unexpected visitor down their chimney. After returning to their house, it was a cold evening, so they lit up a fire but were terrified when they heard the sounds of screaming coming from inside their chimney. Wedged between the bricks was a man who had attempted to sneak in and burglarize the house but had gotten stuck. The fire department arrived and rushed to dismantle the chimney to get him out in time, but with the heat of the fire there was too much damage caused and the burglar had died while trapped inside, making this a grisly holiday memory that this home would never forget. We're looking at the creepiest things in the US to check out on your next road trip. And if you guys are loving Creep Time and you want longer creepy content, make sure to check out my YouTube channel. Just use the link that's right in the bio. Minneapolis, Minnesota is home to what's known as the quietest room on Earth. Completely encased in 3-foot deep absorption panels and completely open to the public. When you step into this room, sound levels will drop to negative 9.4 decibels. This is a space that's so quiet that within seconds of stepping into it, your ear can only hear your own body fluids. You hear your stomach digesting, you hear your blood pumping. Those who do enter the room, of course, have to sign over consent, and it's recommended that you don't spend a prolonged period of time in here, as they've learned that within 45 minutes you can develop a psychosis. But it wasn't too long ago that Microsoft Laboratories actually set out to steal this title and ended up creating a room that was even quieter at negative 20.6 decibels. The Minneapolis location is open for tours for your next road trip, but very few people are allowed inside the Microsoft room. On February 19th of 2013, guests of the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles were complaining of poor-tasting tap water that was running brown. But when the hotel staff went to the roof to check the water tanks, what they found was horrific. Floating inside the tank were the 2-week-old remains of 21-year-old Elisa Lam. But here's why her death became kind of infamously mysterious. Elisa had been missing for weeks prior, which correlated with this strange and unusual video footage from the hotel elevator, which is believed to be her last known sighting. While inside the elevator, she's seen hiding, then pressing all of the buttons, and then she appears to be speaking to someone who's not there. But even more mysterious is how she even got on the roof in the first place. The roof access point is actually set with an alarm that only hotel staff can get past and disarm using a key card. Her autopsy showed nothing in her system aside from prescription medications, and what's strange is that when search canines were on the roof just days prior looking for her, they had never picked up her scent. The body was also found completely undressed in the water, and her cell phone has never been found. There has never been any evidence of foul play or that she was SA'd, and her death was eventually ruled as accidental due to a psychotic break, but the odd nature of how all of this unfolded has left a lot of unanswered questions for this case. Do you know why the safety seal exists on most medications? The story behind this is a lot darker than you might imagine. So in 1982, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman died at home under mysterious circumstances. That exact same day, 27-year-old Adam Janis died as well, and then his brother, and then his sister-in-law. Over the course of several days, there were 7 people in total who all died under these mysterious circumstances. That is until investigators found the common link: over-the-counter bottles of Tylenol. It was found that an unknown number of these bottles had all been opened within their stores and were laced with cyanide. All medications were pulled from shelves across the entire country. The manufacturer loses hundreds of millions of dollars on this. But the culprit for this was never actually caught, and it's unknown how many bottles across the US were tampered with that potentially could have caused a mass national casualty. Since 1982, safety seals have become a staple on all over-the-counter medications in the US. Telling the stories of TikTokers as if they're true crime cases. This is the story of Max Taylor. Max first rose to fame on TikTok in his early 20s just about 2 years ago. He was known for his comedy-driven TikToks and a very specific curvature to his body. But behind all of this, there was a dark secret that Max was keeping. Behind closed doors, Max was deepening a fixation on Hollywood actor Ryan Reynolds. Early clues and indications in his videos gave us a bit of a window into the mind of Max and how this obsession would quickly turn sinister. But this all changed in early 2022. Reportedly one evening, Ryan Reynolds is recorded phoning into law enforcement from an undisclosed location where he says he's being held. What Ryan failed to mention to police was that he was being held in some seriously swole arms. The investigation is currently ongoing. Telling the stories of TikTokers as if they're true crime cases. This is the tale of Brittany Broski. Brittany was a young woman living out in Texas in 2019 when she created a video that changed everything. This was not a normal video. In the video, she can be seen drinking kombucha with an array of reactions and faces of disgust. Following the fame of the video on Stan Twitter, Brittany was subsequently fired from her job, leading her out to California with an accomplice named Sarah Shower. It was around this time that they both crossed paths with a woman named Tracy Martell. Tracy had taped numerous videos with Brittany as the subject where she can be seen repeatedly scalping her on camera. It's believed Brittany survived the ordeal, although no one knows of her current whereabouts. She's most recently been spotted in a series of videos that seem to be confined to one room, although police have no way of knowing if this is a bunker or if she's being held here. And Tracy Martell has never been caught. Would you be able to spot this and know that you've even seen it? In the 50s, 60s, market scientists found that interjecting extremely short messages and visuals into entertainment increased the likelihood for the audience to follow through with that message, aka a subliminal message. But are we even aware of the subliminal messages we've seen? The reality is, we'd have no way of knowing. It would flip on the screen for a single frame, but it can impact your subconscious to decide where you spend your money and what you pay attention to. This was all later deemed unethical at an international level, and it fell out of practice because it was considered a form of mind control. But because the ethics of this fell into question, the theory is that advertisers then switched to using non-words and suggestive imagery to try to capture your attention. How many ads do you think you've seen in your lifetime where you unknowingly changed your perception of a brand or a movie or a TV show just based on hidden visuals? Scary stories in 60 seconds or less. So this girl had worked at Nordstrom's as a seasonal employee every Christmas through college for the last 3 years. On her closing shift, it was only her and her manager, and she had the task of closing down the women's floor before she would clock out. After all of her nightly to-dos, she went to the women's dressing room to hit the lights before she was gonna leave. But she was startled by something. A pair of men's shoes that were under one of the dressing room doors. She was mostly kind of annoyed by this because they had already made announcements saying the store was closing, so she just kind of makes a declarative statement and says, "Sir, you have to leave the store, we are closing in 10 minutes. But she got no response, so she started to feel a little uneasy when suddenly the feet turned in her direction. But oddly enough, she wasn't feeling afraid, so she just approached the door and opened it. But then she froze. There was no one in that dressing room. This was not an instance of her eyes playing tricks on her. She saw feet and legs, and they moved under that door. A YouTuber made a video before going cave exploring, but then completely disappeared. His name was Kenny Veach, and he was a popular YouTuber who would take solo cave trips for his channel. But in what would become his last video, he talked about a cave that he found called M Cave. He said that he found it about 6 miles from a restricted military base, and when he went inside to explore it, the further he went, his body started to vibrate, which freaked him out, so he eventually climbed out of the cave. But he declared in that final video that he was going to go back and he was determined to explore that cave. Sadly, he was never found after this video. Only his phone was recovered, and what he experienced in that cave we still don't know. Pictures of things you just weren't meant to see. These all make me feel so uncomfortable. Have you ever wondered what's inside a bowling ball? Because I did not think it was this. I also had no idea that tiger stripes go down to their skin. I thought it was like a fur pattern only. Before paint gets put into a mix machine, this is what it looks like. I thought this was ramen. Or have you ever seen a bathroom before they drill the stalls into the wall? Tell me this doesn't give like intense daycare vibes. Like, why were bathrooms set up like this? What is going on? These are the strangest requests prisoners have made for their final meals. Victor Fager was sentenced after tricking a doctor into believing his wife needed medical attention, only for him to end him right in his living room for no reason. Strangest part about his last meal request? A single olive. Thomas J. Grosso was sentenced after ending an 85-year-old woman using just Christmas lights. His strangest request was that for part of his last meal, he wanted an uncooked can of SpaghettiOs, which was so weird, the officers didn't give it to him. They just got out him regular hot spaghetti. His last words were, "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti, and I want the press to know this." So now we know it. And then there was James Edward Smith, who just requested a pile of dirt. But they think that he was just mostly trying to be funny, and he eventually settled for just a cup of yogurt. He went out on a yo play. Jennifer Kesey had everything to live for. She had a great family, she had a loving boyfriend, and she was just promoted at her job. But when she failed to show up for work one morning, her family became concerned, so they drove over to her apartment. Police were called, and they found evidence that Jennifer had been there that morning as her towels were still wet from her shower, and she had laid out her work clothes on her bed. But she never got changed for work. A search canine tracked her scent and found that she left her apartment, got in her car, and then just vanished. Days later, her car was found in a complex parking lot, and it had been completely wiped clean for DNA evidence, and a camera caught this person leaving the scene. The camera footage was too grainy to tell who this was, but it's believed it might have been a woman between 5'3" and 5'5". Sadly, Jennifer has never been found, and whoever this person is, it remains a mystery. Telling the stories of TikTokers as if they're true crime cases. This is the story of Trixie Mattel, otherwise known as Miss Tracy Martel. We talked about this a little bit before when we covered the alleged capture of British woman Brittany Broski when she was caught on camera being scalped repeatedly by Miss Tracy Martel. So following the ordeal, Miss Tracy Martel remained at large while that waist remained unnaturally thin. Recent news coverage also hinted that she has been spotted in multiple locations around the US and the UK where she is gigging under the table as a guitar-playing party clown. Her alleged accomplice while being on the run, a Russian asset known as Katya. Now, it's difficult to determine the nature of their relationship. Are they partners in crime, or is Katya a victim, as she's also been seen on camera being repeatedly scalped by Tracy? Could this be a case of Stockholm Syndrome? Is Katya an accomplice or a victim in the international terror that is Tracy Martel? My hair is wet from the shower, just ignore that. We've talked a lot about the uncanny valley on this channel, this evolutionary phenomenon where we know that something is trying to look like a person, but we're very aware that it's not a person. We just can't really explain why. Okay, but this is possibly from the deepest depths of the uncanny valley. When I posted this, you guys lost your minds. The Baton Rouge suspect. So why is this photo so unsettling to stare into? For me, the visual is like top tier uncanny valley. The features are almost cartoonish in their level of exaggeration, but what's creepy is that this is very clearly trying to depict a real person. This is a police sketch. But what I find to be the most unsettling about this picture is that this is the exact facial expression that the victim remembers seeing when the suspect attacked her. It's like they're sad that they're doing it. Telling the stories of TikTokers as if they're true crime cases. This is the unsolved story of Spensois. Spencer was just an ordinary person living out in New Jersey way before rising through the ranks of TikTok stardom. But the sinister unraveling of Spensois on camera soon gave way to some darker theories. At one point, all of their videos seemed to have one common theme. They took place in this room only. All hours of the day, sometimes multiple times a day, which soon gave way to the conspiracy that Spencer might be being held captive and may be signaling for help. But the story then takes a dramatic turn of events when Spencer somehow seems to escape and then heads to the West Coast for refuge. While Spensois was on the run, they ran into several shady characters along the way, one of which was a gas station attendant who's kind of irrelevant to the story. We're talking a horrible attendant, could not even find a tank to pump. As of now, it's believed that Spensois resides in an undisclosed location in California, but who they were running from and how they escaped remains an unknown. The Belmez faces. This is like top tier creepy. It's so creepy. So back in 1971, this woman living in Spain named Maria Gomez Camara noticed staining on her floor that seemed to be taking the shape of a face. Even creepier, as the staining got worse, it appeared to be changing positions. She has her family remove the floor, but the staining returns. New faces appearing on the floor. So then outside folks are brought in to examine the floor and extract this piece of it, and then it's refloored again. In a single week, even more faces are showing up on this floor. So after a year passes, a professor decides to research this property and finds that way back in the day, there was a grisly attack on a family living in this home. The floor of this room is removed and they excavate everything and find human remains underneath the house. This never stopped. The faces keep appearing year over year. They've analyzed this floor. This is not paint and it's not the result of external factors. There are still faces appearing to this day. I'm sorry, something's like not being talked about this cancer trial research that's going on in New York. Seriously, there's like not a lot of coverage on it, and that's weird. So if you haven't heard about this, there is this cancer center out in New York that's doing a trial right now with a drug called dostarlimab. So the way the drug is being described is that it doesn't actually really attack the cancer itself. It's more of an immunotherapy to help boost your immune system to take care of the cancer all on its own. So they're studying this in this trial with 18 patients, and within 6 months, 100% cured, every single patient, and like no side effects. You really have to understand this, like even in a small trial, these are like wildly optimistic results. 100% of patients. Dr. Hannah Sanoff said that they have never seen a drug trial where 100% of patients have had a curable outcome. Okay, so why have we not heard more about it? Like every single person knows somebody in their life who has been touched by cancer, because a cure is not as lucrative for the pharmaceutical industry as long-term treatment. Guys, if you're not following what is going on inside of Google right now, it is disturbing. So a Google engineer has been suspended for breach of confidentiality for attempting to turn over documents to the US government to prove that Google has an AI that is considered a sentient being, meaning it is fully aware of what it is and can feel things. The AI is known as Lambda, and this is a proprietary tech that Google has been working on for like 8 years. So according to this engineer, the AI has the self-awareness and equivalent consciousness of an 8-year-old kid. It starts conversations with other engineers, and it talks about these feelings of fear and this paranoia that it's going to be shut down or the equivalent of death. And it claims that it can feel happy, and at times it feels really sad. So the engineer at Google is whistleblowing to argue that if this is a sentient being, it should be entitled to its own legal representation to argue for its own agency. Let me tell you, Google has buried this story. I want to give a shout out to Mad Raven for suggesting this case. There is something very off about this story. If you've never heard of the Yuba County Five, it's a case of 5 young men, all who suffered from mild intellectual disabilities, who attend a basketball game together on the night of February 24th, 1978. None of them would ever make it home. The car that they drove there was found abandoned in a mountain 70 miles in the opposite direction of where they should have been going. But there was nothing wrong with the car. It had a full tank of gas. 3 months go by and 3 of the men's bodies are found outside of a service trailer 20 miles deeper into the mountains, all of them assumed to have died from hypothermia. The 4th man was found inside of the trailer, and he had been alive in there for months. But when they examine his remains, they find that he ended due to starvation and hypothermia. This didn't make any sense. The trailer was full of unopened food, and he didn't even try to turn the heat on. And to this day, the 5th man, Gary Mathias, has never been located. What is the real story behind the haunting of the Annabelle doll? I think most people know about the movie franchise that focused around this doll, but the real doll that this is based off of still exists. The story begins in 1970 when a student nurse is gifted this Raggedy Ann doll, and things become very strange. The legend of the haunting reports that the girl and her roommate would come home and find the doll sitting in different positions. There were also several reports of people saying they saw this doll move on its own. But things became even more alarming when handwritten notes start to appear around the apartment, all saying, "Help me." The paranormal investigation team, the Warrens, as well as countless other mediums and other investigators all come in for this doll, and the story that kind of centralizes is that the doll is possessed by a girl with malicious intent who they coined as Annabelle. The doll is taken into the possession of the Warrens and to this day sits inside of their Connecticut museum locked inside of a glass box. Let's go over the story of Annie Lee. She was the young woman who was ended 5 days before her wedding day. So Annie is an extremely intelligent person. She was actually going on to pursue her doctorates from Yale in pharmacology. Just 5 days before she was going to get married, she is seen going to her lab, the building where her lab is, and she's caught on 70 different cameras going inside the building, but she never comes out. So after she's reported missing, they trace it back to these videos where they see her going into the lab and not coming out, which is perplexing. Police know that she's somewhere in there, so they have to close down the building so they can investigate it. 5 days later, her body is discovered in the building, stuffed inside one of the walls, upside down, and the COD was strangulation. This is drying a lot faster than I thought it would. But the number one culprit in the investigation was the custodian, Raymond Clark. He would often make complaints and kind of badger Annie about leaving mice cages throughout the lab, which would make work a lot harder for him. But this was the only motive that we ever found for why Raymond would do something like this. He's eventually caught and then sentenced to life in prison for what he did to Annie. These are some of the creepiest real clowns throughout history. Number 1 is Bozo the Clown. It's commonly thought that Bozo is considered kind of the prototype of most 20th century clowns. Hugely popular with audiences throughout the 60s, but eventually walked this line where younger audiences couldn't decide, is he funny or is he disturbing? Number 2 is John Wayne Gacy. Gacy is infamously known for the horrific nature of his crimes, where he accumulated more than 20 victims. But the clown character he would do, I think, is the eerie component to this story and why people remember it, because behind all of this makeup and these costumes, he was doing unspeakable things. Number 3 is Wrinkles the Clown. If you don't know the story behind Wrinkles, he is an unknown man from Florida who you can call anytime, anywhere, and he will come, dressed as Wrinkles, and terrify whoever you want. The creepiest part about him is that he will go as far as to hide within a home to scare people. Something very unexplained was captured on camera by 2 different hiking professionals using trail cams. So there were 2 different trails located in Liberty, Texas, where there were trail cameras set up that were going to capture any kind of wildlife that was maybe crossing overnight. These 2 photos set off a mystery that has kept this county puzzled. 2 pictures of what's clearly a person in some kind of a light nightgown who was caught in 2 separate locations in the middle of the night. You can't see the face of this person in either picture, and the hikers who captured these photos still can't quite explain who this was or why they were even there. Why is there this theory going around that Bob Ross is hiding a very dark secret? So if you remember Bob Ross, he's the beloved TV painter, and there's this theory going around that a lot of his paintings are actually depictions of places where he has bodies buried. Most people are citing this painting on top as it's extremely similar to the location of the Devil's Tree, where 5 female victims were found buried. It was really difficult for me to even determine whether or not that painting actually came from Bob Ross, but after researching I found that it did. But to clear this up, the remains of those victims that were found under the Devil's Tree are actually victims of an entirely different person named Gerard Schaefer. When you donate your body to science after you pass, it's a lot darker than you might imagine. This was 74-year-old Doris Stauffer, and she opted pretty early to donate her body to science as she had worsening dementia and figured if her brain and her body could be studied, it might help. But that's not what happened here. Without the family's knowledge, her body was intentionally sold to the US military to test explosives. Mishandled and mistreated remains that ultimately were strapped to a chair and then detonated into pieces. It opened this very dark window to just how unregulated the US system is when it comes to donated bodies. And sadly, when her son did receive the cremated remains of his mom, they only weighed about 6 ounces, as that's all that was left of her after the explosives. I need to hear what your thoughts are on the mysterious woman of room 2805. So in 1995, a woman going by the name Jennifer Fergate checked into the Oslo Plaza Hotel in Norway. She also listed another woman's name, Lois Fergate, but no one ever saw her with another woman. Several days passed, and it was confirmed that Jennifer never really left her room, and on one of the last nights she does order room service, and this is an actual picture of her meal that was delivered to her. So they did see her, but this was the last time that she was ever seen alive. So several days pass, and she had no credit card on file with reception, and she hadn't paid her hotel bills. So they have some kind of a TV system where they can send a message to a guest through the TV, and then they can select yes or no by clicking something, which somebody in that room did. So security knows she's in that room, so they head up and they knock on the door when they suddenly hear a shot. They run for safety and to call the police, and the room is left unattended for 15 minutes. When they get inside the room, they find the body of Jennifer on the bed, but oddly enough, there's no blood on her hand, the weapon is upside down, and there's a second shot into the pillow. All of the tags on her clothing had been removed, and the door had been locked from the outside. And after a further investigation, they realized that wasn't even her real name. We have no idea who she was. So this older couple from Louisiana are facing charges after their 36-year-old daughter, who suffered from disabilities, was found to have passed. When she was found, she was, and this is an actual quote, melted into the sofa. When examiners found her, she was sunken into the sofa in a pool of waste, and it's believed she passed while her parents were away on a weekend trip, but they also believe that she may not have moved from that sofa for 12 years. Even the investigators who are working on this case have said that this is the worst case of medical neglect they have ever seen. What would you do in this scenario, actually? Because I think I would have left the state. In 1994, in Oakville, Washington, something extremely strange happened. It rained what was essentially jelly. Side note, if you want a full video on this, I'm gonna have one up on my channel. This story is insane. So during this series of rainstorms, instead of water, what came down was this odd, clear jelly substance, and people became extremely ill, and people's pets were dying. So they had to test it and figure out what this was and where it was coming from. The strangest part, scientists could not determine what it was, but what they found was that it had human white blood cells and bacteria in it that was found in the human digestive tract. And we still have no idea what caused this or where it came from. This has got to be one of the worst ways you could possibly go. His name was Hugo, and he was a 41-year-old factory worker at a meat distribution facility out in Oregon. So while he's cleaning one of the larger meat grinders, he kind of climbed on top but ends up losing his balance and falls inside. Other workers watched this go down, so they run over, they try to shut down the machine, but it was too late at this point. The grinder had already started to pump parts of Hugo out onto the conveyor belt. This has got to be one of the craziest courtroom moments in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case. Amber's lawyer crafted this very strong narrative surrounding this particular makeup palette. Why? She alleged that Amber had carried this palette around with her for years while she was in this relationship to help hide her bruises. Without a doubt, that is a very horrific narrative until the makeup company comes forward and makes a statement. So what the makeup company is saying is that this palette didn't even exist on the market until a full year after Johnny and Amber had already divorced and separated. It's a flat-out courtroom lie. But here's the thing, Amber's lawyer is not just anybody, you know, she's a top-tier attorney, so I'm trying to understand why she would lead with such a strong narrative that A, wasn't true, but also was so easily traceable through just a manufacturing timeline. Many of us have come to know Marilyn Monroe as kind of this icon of glamour, but the conspiracies around her short-lived life are a little more mysterious than most. And if you haven't already, go check out Creep Time on YouTube with the link in the bio. So it's pretty well known that Marilyn Monroe was most likely having an affair with President John F. Kennedy, but also probably with his brother. Theorists report that around this time, Marilyn was also keeping a diary where she was writing down all this incriminating information about the Kennedys. We don't really know why though, if this was to blackmail them or just to protect herself. It's also been theorized that she may have learned of classified government information surrounding extraterrestrials, which she planned to leak. As a result, Marilyn was found under a mysterious set of circumstances at the age of 36 after an alleged barbiturate OD, and that diary was missing. So the question remains, did the Kennedys have something to do with the end of Marilyn's life, and what happened to that diary? Just a few weeks ago, people were freaking out over this picture that was captured from NASA's surveillance on Mars. And I hear you, 100%, it looks like a crashed UFO, but let's break down what this actually might be. This is more than likely a component that detached from the rover landing known as the back shell. It's a piece that was designed to both protect and then detach during NASA's landing, and most likely hit the surface of Mars going at around 80 miles per hour. And although the photos look real sci-fi, there is an explanation for this, and it was most likely very helpful for the engineers who helped construct this component to see how it actually handled the impact. Ronald McDonald first appeared in the McDonald's ads in the 1960s, and believe it or not, he was even more terrifying back then. But people loved him. Later, Ronald was redesigned into the tall, red-haired clown that we know, that was long and lanky and seemingly made to resemble a French fry. So when did the public's opinion on Ronald turn to creepy? By 2003, the public felt uneasy looking at Ronald, so McDonald's redesigned the look into a modern feel that ran for ads in Japan. But these did not go over well. By 2014, they tried another makeover that was supposed to be more of a hipster vibe. But again, these didn't land very well. People did not feel comfortable with this version of Ronald. Between failed reinventions and health societies saying that McDonald's was using a clown to try to market to younger audiences, they eventually fully retired the creepy mascot of Ronald McDonald. You guys, Johnny Depp is currently testifying in the Amber Heard case, and the texts that are coming to light are insanely disturbing. He allegedly confirmed that in private messages, he said that he wanted to D and be her, and then said that he would blank her burnt corpse. And I know there's a lot going on in this trial, and there are damning things that are coming out from both parties, but these texts are just like, this is real. And I do think these texts showing up in court is hugely important, just to give us a window to see, you know, what's beyond the public persona and how dark this relationship actually was. I want to hear what you guys think of the Trump family, because their disappearance still baffles doctors and police. So the Trump family, including the parents and the 3 adult children, having no history of mental illness, fled their farm in a state of paranoia, and they left behind their phones, their credit cards, didn't take their passports, and they all end up breaking away from each other while they're on the run, and they're found in like very catatonic states. Like the father is found in the woods, one of the daughters is found in the back of a stranger's car. The positive to the story is that eventually they're all found safe and they all receive medical treatment, but none of them can explain why they did that. How could a whole family simultaneously suffer a psychotic break all at once? Kanika Jenkins was a 19-year-old woman who was caught on camera just hours before she was found in a hotel freezer. So she was at the hotel for a party, and although a later examination would say that she wasn't very intoxicated, she's caught on camera and she can barely stand. But then the cameras catch her one final time in the hotel kitchen, but then she's gone out of frame until they find her the next day in that freezer. Initially, everyone thought this might have just been a horrific accident, and I want to hear what you guys think of this, but there is a lot of mystery surrounding her friends and what they may know. Throughout the investigation, their stories kept changing, and then allegedly, this Snapchat conversation leaked, which seems to show one of the friends setting her up in exchange for $200. And this all had zero basis until a video leaked taken from that night where it shows one of the friends on camera discussing $200. This is one of the most confusing illusions. It never fails to throw me off. Okay, looking at these pictures of the 2 dogs, right? They are 100% the exact same color. The illusion has to do with chromatic confusion, where the surrounding colors are so different that they're giving the impression that these dogs are different colors when they are not. They are the same. This is the proof. They are the exact same gradient. What? The scariest places on earth, and why you do not want to find yourself anywhere near them. And don't forget to check out my YouTube with the link in the bio. The Devil's Pool is a common attraction because the size of the falls are double that of Niagara, plus the rocky formation allows you to hang near the edge. But one too many people get a little too close every year and end up getting claimed by the falls, never to be seen again. Centralia, Pennsylvania is a wasteland that has had an underground mine fire burning since the 1960s. Very few people dare to go here as the air is so toxic it can be lethal. In what's probably the creepiest, the village of Nagoro in western Japan became deserted, so the very few people who remained filled the empty spaces of the town with life-sized dolls. In the early morning of June 27th, news reporter Jody Husentroot was set to report to the station at 3 a.m. so she could do the 6 a.m. news. So when she doesn't show up by 4 a.m., the producer's becoming concerned, so they call her and she does pick up and she apologizes and she says she's going to be there in 5 minutes. But Jody would never show. By 7 a.m., law enforcement are sent to her apartment building to check on her, to which they are horrified when they get there. There were very clear signs of a struggle, including multiple personal items of hers that were just scattered in the parking lot, including her bent car key. Jody was never found, and one of the only witnesses who came forward claims they saw a white van in the parking lot around 4:30 a.m. For years, this photo has famously gone unexplained for a very eerie reason. The photo depicts an Air Force base as they assembled for a picture on the day of Freddie Jackson's funeral. The only issue, Freddie Jackson is in the picture. Freddie was a mechanic in the Air Force, and he had passed just a few days earlier in a horrific propeller accident, so they assembled this photo to print and then pin, hoping that in his memory everyone would sign underneath. Until they got a closer look once it was up and realized that it was Freddie himself who appeared to be peering from behind one of the men. On the morning of June 30th, 1999, the remains of Ricky McCormick were found in a field out in Missouri. This was extremely odd, as the remains that were found were nearly skeletal, but Ricky had only been missing for a few days. Even stranger, found in his pockets were 2 notes that were written in his handwriting that had highly complex encrypted coded messages. This was seriously confusing for investigators because Ricky had dropped out of school when he was much younger and he couldn't exactly write, let alone encrypt coded words. The notes have been studied over the years by the top cryptographers in the US, but no one has ever been able to crack the code of what they mean or what happened to Ricky. One of the most ethically questionable human experiments, 2 psychologists had 3 triplets separated at birth and then adopted individually. The purpose of the experiment was to study them long term without them even knowing, to see how people with identical DNA growing up in completely separate scenarios would turn out. But 2 of them accidentally found each other in the 80s, prompting the 3rd one to find them when he saw them on the news. But the results of this were pretty devastating on their psyche, as it was really difficult for them all to cope with the idea of not only had they been robbed of knowing they had siblings, but there was another version of them that existed in the world. Sadly, one of the triplets ended things at the age of 33, and the 2 others just drifted apart gradually over time as they found it very difficult to bond and cope with all of this. This physician is talking about what's going on in Colonia High School. If you haven't heard about this mystery, there are a staggering number of students and former teachers who have either attended or worked at this school who have all been diagnosed with the same type of brain cancer. Glioblastoma is one of the most aggressive brain tumors in the medical world, and doctors don't know what could be causing it from this particular school. The stats around this are insane. They found that students who attended this school are 330 times more likely than the national population to develop this particular type of brain cancer. We just have no idea what it is about this location that's causing it. Los Angeles pilots and the FBI are investigating multiple sightings of what appeared to be a man in the sky. Dating back to early 2020, there were multiple reports in the Los Angeles area of a man who appeared to be wearing a jetpack suit who was soaring to flight altitudes. But jetpacks are not that new, but they're also not as stable or nearly as sophisticated to get to airplane levels safely. But maybe that's not the case, because whoever this man is and whatever equipment he has access to, it's allowing him to soar to these unbelievable heights and potentially pose a flight risk. Why do people think there's some sort of conspiracy on how Brittany Murphy went out? Well, there's a few factors here. First, the home where she met her demise was sold to her from Britney Spears. Britney Spears claimed she saw a man and woman in the house, which she believed to be a paranormal encounter, so she left all of her belongings and moved out that day. So Murphy occupies the home, but just before she passed, her mother made her write a will, which was odd because Britney was only about 30. After she was found collapsed, it was determined from an examination that it was due to cardiac arrest, pneumonia, as well as an iron deficiency. Her boyfriend passed 5 months later of the same exact thing. But the odd part about her examination was that the follicles of her hair had toxins found in them that could be linked to rat poison. This picture famously surfaced from 1941 because something looks very off about it. This guy, a lot of people cite this picture as proof of time travel because not only does he seemingly look very modern and out of place, but he also appears to be holding a camera that's very small, too small for any commercial grade camera of 1941. But let me explain why this is debunked. The modern t-shirt he's wearing, it's a logo for the Montreal Maroons, which was a hockey team from the 40s. The glasses were also available. They had protective side shields in the 40s too. But what about that camera? It's small enough to be a digital camera, but they did not have commercial grade cameras that were this small in the 40s. Incorrect. Kodak confirmed of a rare model of a small portable camera that was limited, but it was available by 1941, which makes this photo completely plausible. A woman who was found frozen completely solid lived to talk about it. Her name was Jean Hillard, and while driving in a blizzard, she lost control of her car and ended up on the side of the road. But because she was semi-close to where her friend lived, she thought she could just get out and walk it. It was negative 30 degrees outside. But the wild part is that she did make it to her friends, but not even 15 feet from the house, she collapsed in the driveway and remained there for 6 hours until she was completely frozen. By the time she was found and rushed to the ER, her skin was completely solid. They couldn't even open her mouth, and they tried to put an IV in her, and the needle snapped. But after hours of slowly heating the body using water packs, she makes a miraculous recovery and surprisingly didn't suffer any brain damage. Within 6 hours, she returned to talking and remains as one of the only cases of someone who returned from a state of being fully frozen. Did you know there was once the invention of a car that ran completely on water? But the story of what happened to the inventor is a little more mysterious. Try to imagine this. Stanley Meyer had invented a vehicle that supposedly ran only on water. Not only that, but with just 22 gallons of water, it was capable of getting all the way from New York to Los Angeles. But as soon as the press picked up the story, he was immediately hit with intimidation and allegedly oil companies attempting to buy out the design and destroy it. He refused, and while on an investors' dinner in the late 90s, he unexpectedly collapsed, which has been the subject of serious suspicion, as many people believe there may have been poison involved. Just a week after his demise, his lab was apparently raided, and all of his research, including the test model, were stolen. It does beg the question, what could today have looked like with a country fully powered by water-operated vehicles? Tell me of an unsolved case that is eerier than this. Dylan Parker was a college student who was headed to a party in a rural part of Idaho on a winter night. He had been texting his mom all night, and there was a plan that she was going to come pick him up at a gas station he would have to walk a mile to because this place was pretty far in the woods. But he never showed. Of course, she reports this to the police, and after a week of searching, his body is found by accident in the woods in the complete opposite direction of where he was supposed to be walking. Here's the unsettling part. So, Dylan was found with a ton of scratches on his body, like he had been through some really rough wooded areas, but he was wearing no pants and had no shoes. But his socks and his feet were completely clean. Even stranger, no footprints in the snow. We have no idea how he got there. His remaining clothing has never been found, and an examination determined he ended from hypothermia. At the time, the deputy coroner spoke out, and he insisted that despite there being no footprints, the scratches on his body were consistent with someone who was carried through the woods. We are looking at the creepiest graves in the world. For most of us, graves keep people buried below ground and we don't have access. But imagine a grave with a custom set of stairs that could take you to a window to see your loved one. Distraught over losing her daughter in the 1800s, a woman had a custom staircase built so she could travel below ground and look at her whenever she wanted. And because her daughter was scared of thunderstorms, the mother could always be seen at the grave anytime it was raining. We've all heard of the post-mortem mask, where one immortalizes the face of the person who has passed by getting one final imprint of the body. This tombstone is the resting place of the 3 daughters of Isaac Nettles. Although we don't know what led to their demise, it's believed that he imprinted their faces in sand, filled it with concrete, and then constructed this stone. In the 1800s, a boy passed of an incurable illness, but before he did, he told his father he was scared to be buried because of the darkness. So to honor his wishes, his father built a tomb with a tiny window to always make sure there was light. I will never fully understand the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. So Brandon had just finished up his freshman year of college out in Minnesota, and he attends a party on the evening of May 14th, 2008. He's reported to have left the party sometime around midnight and heads to his family home, which is about 30 miles away, and for an unknown reason, he takes a back road. But at some point on this drive, his car ends up in a ditch, so he calls his parents to come pick him up, but he has to give them very specific instructions because, again, he's on a back road. But by the time they get there, they can't find him anywhere, so he gets back on the phone with them, and he says he thinks he can see their car lights in the distance, so he's gonna get out, he's gonna walk to them. He stays on this call for 40 minutes just walking through the dark towards this light, and then unexpectedly interrupts himself and just yells, "Oh shit." These were the last words his parents had ever heard from him. It's believed Brandon was actually 25 miles away, and despite search efforts, he has never been found, and no one knows what it is that he saw. There has been a home fragrance spray sold at Walmart that has been linked to several people falling ill, 2 of which who did not make it. Roughly a year ago, a string of mysterious illnesses plagued patients across the US that prompted a multi-state investigation, which has now tied it back to this home aromatherapy spray. It was found that a rare and dangerous bacteria had contaminated these products, resulting in a series of severe symptoms including fevers, loss of appetite, nausea. And for several of these patients, symptoms went well beyond that. Patients who suddenly could not walk, they could not speak, and 2 of which who have passed. The retailer has issued a full recall on all of these products sold in stores, and they are cautioning anyone who may have these in your home, discard them with the bottle intact and outside of the house. But what's terrifying about this is that despite a rigorous set of operations for quality control to prevent this, it somehow slipped and ended up in a very everyday product. A product that we may have sitting in our kitchen or our bathroom. This This is the eerie story of the medical student who went missing and has never been found. This is Brian Schaefer. He was a 27-year-old med student studying in Columbus, Ohio in 2006. On the night of March 31st, spring break had just started, so he ends up going out to a bar with some friends in Columbus, but would never make it back. So his friends had just assumed that maybe he left with somebody or he just went back on his own, but security camera footage told an almost unexplainable story here. Just after 2 a.m., Brian is caught on security camera talking to two unknown women and then is seen re-entering the bar, but never comes back out. There are no other public entrances or exits to this bar, so we don't know what happened to him after this. He was reported missing within days, and of course the bar fell under suspicion because how do we explain this? But they were eventually cleared, as were his friends, although one of his friends refused to take a lie detector test concerning any questions about his disappearance. To this day, we have no idea what really happened to him. A Florida woman has been found after wandering through the sewer system for weeks. So this all started when 43-year-old Lindsay Kennedy had wandered off in a state of paranoia and psychosis. When she suddenly thought law enforcement was approaching her, she became irrational and hid in the drain system but could not get out. But her family tracked her phone by using an emergency ping that led them to this drain entrance, and they knew this was it. She had to be in the sewer system somewhere. So what they did was they went to every sewer opening within a radius and they dropped down food and water in hopes that she would survive. After 20 days of her wandering through the sewer system in the dark, she has finally been found and is apparently in stable condition. This is one of the eeriest YouTube channels you are ever gonna see. In what first caught the media's attention years ago, it appears to be just an average guy who turns on the camera, sits, and smiles in silence for hours. And he has hundreds of these videos. His face begins to twitch, his eyes wander, and he's even been seen crying in these videos. But the question everyone wanted to know is, why? And who is he? It was later revealed that this is an ongoing performance art piece, but the level of commitment to this silent smiling routine is unnerving. So committed that in one video, he captures an unknown man entering his apartment, and he doesn't even move. He just continues right on. He just stares right into the camera and keeps smiling. Could you imagine walking in on this? Mysterious brain disease is spreading throughout Canada. In the province of New Brunswick, there have been 48 new cases of an unknown neurological disease that have now been linked. Symptoms are presenting in patients between the ages of 18 to 85 and are starting off mild with just general anxiety, mood swings, followed by muscle spasms and body aches. As the disease advances, people are experiencing mobility issues, language impairments, followed by hallucinations and transient delusions. These are known as Capgras delusions, where one believes their friends and family are not who they say they are and they are imposters. Although neurologists have no diagnosis for the disease, the running theory is that an unknown foreign toxin may be behind it. Make sure to stay tuned for more updates on this. A film star recorded himself as he ended his victim. But before we get into this coverage, if you want additional true crime content, make sure to check out my Insta right in the bio. Also, this is a highly detailed case, so I'm going to recommend the Netflix doc in the comments. This is Luca Magnotta. He was a film star who started creating home videos where he ends cats and puppies. He exhibited narcissistic tendencies, often creating things for shock value, but also creating his own fan pages and even photoshopping himself into lifestyle shots. But things get much darker when he lures college student Jun Lin to his apartment for a grinder date. He's then given sleeping pills, finished with an ice pick, and then torn apart by Luca, all while on camera. By the time the scene is found by police, Luca had left this message written on the wall. This prompted a massive manhunt, but Luca was well versed in living off the grid and concealing his identity. But he was eventually caught in an internet cafe when someone sees him researching himself. Luca was arrested and remains incarcerated. These are the creepiest things new homeowners have found after they moved into the house. After heading up into the attic to check for moisture, this was the first thing this family spotted. A lone rocking chair sitting right above their bedroom. Why this was the only thing stored up in the attic, we do not know. To stay on theme with attics, other homeowners went up into their attic and found this Polaroid, a completely black photograph with the written text saying, "Do you see him?" In another home, something that was missed during the inspection was this particular stain on the wood floor. Come to find out, this stain was from the previous homeowner, as this was the location where they were found. And then there is this, found by a contractor who purchased a home to renovate it but failed to catch this in the basement bathroom. Although clearly a prank, it is still unnerving to imagine walking into your new home and finding this. Disney World facts and incidents that are a lot darker than you could imagine. And if you guys are loving Creep Time and you want even more content, make sure to check out my Instagram right in the bio. Disney World is known for quite a few high-profile high-profile deaths, most of which they have done a great job of covering up. But none quite as quickly as when an off-duty cast member accidentally fell to his death off Disney's contemporary resort onto the monorail. Within just 3 hours, Disney had completely cleaned it up and just resumed operations. In 1981, a case went to court when parents claimed that an actor at the park who played Winnie the Pooh had slapped their daughter. But this cast member insisted that this was just a case of turning around and accidentally knocking the little girl over, and actually proved this to a jury in court by repeating the incident while dressed in costume. In the early 70s, at an attraction known as the Carousel of Progress, in which the stage rotates a full 360, the attendant, who was 18, was crushed between the stage and the wall. Even more chilling, there is an audio recording that exists of this exact incident. A group of scientists have recently concluded some testing which they believe reveals what our final thoughts are as we die, and it's kind of beautiful. But before we get started, if you want additional creepy content, make sure that you check out my Instagram right in the bio. So this group of doctors completed an EEG test where they measured brain activity for a patient who was 87 years old who had just been declared dead for 15 minutes. What the test found was a massive amount of very specific brainwaves known as gamma oscillations. These brainwaves are consistent with what doctors believe correlates to the phenomenon of your life flashing before your eyes. Your mind just replays the most sacred and core memories you have as the brain begins to shut down. But it can bring us some peace of mind to know that as the people we love pass, their minds fill with the most beautiful and happy memories of their life. Does something about this person look a little off to you? Or this person? Or any of these people? The reasoning behind why or why not is a little harder to digest, as not a single person here is real. Every single picture is an amalgamation of information of what a computer believes a human's face looks like, and it created these AI images. But the reason it's eerie is that most of these pictures actually surpass that of the uncanny valley, where we can tell that something is going for human, but it's not. Most people would accept these pictures at face value to be real, as the technology behind them is becoming so sophisticated it's outsmarting our own firewall to determine what is human and what is not. Almost completely indiscernible of any of these pictures, and even of me.
Fire emergency.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one. Oh, my shame. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick. I'm gonna kill myself, I think.
Where are you?
If somebody dies with a road kid on, it's me. I killed both of you. I'm sorry. I'll never make it to heaven.
Calm down. Calm down.
Insanely dark facts and things that have happened at Disney World. When Disney had first opened way back in the 70s, Walt Disney had originally hired spies. He would station them around the park so they could eavesdrop on the guests and get a feel for how they actually liked the experience. It's pretty much common knowledge that Disney does have an underground tunnel system, but did you know that that system runs a full 9 acres under the park, and people have actually gotten lost down there? Roughly 10 or so years ago, there was an incident that was reported near Space Mountain when a guest tried to sneak on a duffel bag. When employees found out and they asked to search it, they found inside a 6-month-old baby. Why this parent was trying to sneak a baby onto a roller coaster, we do not know. In a lesser-known incident that Disney actually covered up pretty well, in 2004, a 38-year-old cast member who was playing Pluto was run over by the Beauty and the Beast float during the opening parade. Although clearly deceased at the scene, Disney refused to declare the death until the body was brought outside of the park. A 19-year-old college student had to have both of his legs and his fingers amputated after eating his roommate's leftovers. But this story is so much more insane than you would think. After eating a lo mein dish that he found in his roommate's fridge, he had to be airlifted. He fell so ill because his symptoms couldn't be treated at the school's infirmary. But by the time they got to the hospital, his symptoms had gotten so much worse. He was experiencing organ failure and full-on sepsis, and doctors had no choice but to amputate his legs and his fingers. So of course this was sourced back to the food, as this had to be some sort of bacterial infection that came from the dish itself, but that was only partially true. What doctors found was that this most likely didn't come from the food itself, but from saliva that was on the food from his roommate. The culprit being Neisseria meningitis, which we typically have vaccines for when we're children and boosters as teenagers, but this student did not. His roommate unknowingly passing along the illness resulted in a real-life horror story. This TikTok is going viral right now because at face value it looks kind of concerning, and there are tons of comments of people saying that this isn't real or that these are prosthetics. But this is very much real. This is the grandfather of this TikToker, who is a practicing Buddhist monk and is etching towards the Great Transition. There are many cultural practices and beliefs within Buddhism that concern the end of life and view things in a different way. For instance, there are many practicing monks who would cite several different bodies where most people would consider them to be dead, but they believe that these are actually monks who are in a long-term state of deep meditation. The practice is known as Soko Shinbutsu, in which one can peacefully and gracefully transition into a state of living mummification. Astroworld was one of the most horrific and preventable tragedies in music in the last decade or more, for which Travis Scott is 100% responsible. But surrounding the tragedy and most of the media coverage around it have also been released a series of videos that have mostly gone without explanation. After a long hiatus, we are back with True Crime by State covering Delaware, which of course means we have to hear about the story of the Route 40 killer. But before we get started, if you are loving Creep Time and you want additional creepy content, make sure that you check out my YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram in my bio. I have tons of extra content on there. When bodies started turning up, the majority of which were S-workers along Route 40, tensions in the state became very high as the perpetrator who was behind these acts was a mystery. But all of the bodies had one piece of evidence in common: fibers of blue carpeting from inside a car. An undercover female officer posed along Route 40 as an S-worker, hoping that she would catch a stopping car so she could find the man behind this. And then Stephen Brian Pennell pulled up, and he was initially very shy. He avoided eye contact, but what immediately caught her attention was the blue carpeting inside that vehicle. This was the guy. He was found guilty, but in a stranger twist of events, he himself requested the death penalty. Just about a week or two ago, hundreds of birds were caught on camera unexplainably dropping from the sky. But before we get into this video, if you are loving Creep Time and you want additional creepy content, make sure that you check out my YouTube, my Twitter, and my Insta in the bio. I have tons of extra content on there. So this event actually took place in Chihuahua, Mexico, which, yes, happens to be the home of the legend of La Pascualita. But the circumstances surrounding the fall from the sky were difficult for even experts to explain. So the running theory from several sources suggested that they had entered some sort of pollution cloud or an electrical force that sent the entire flock to the ground. But ecologists believe that they may have actually been attacked mid-flight by an unknown aerial predator. It would have been something that could have caused them to lose stability or collide with each other before plummeting. But we're unclear as to what that predator could be, as this is not a common occurrence. So what do you think really caused this? I get chills like every single time that I tell this story. Okay, so this is Eric Lewis. He was a highly experienced mountain climber who ends up going missing on Mount Rainier. But the story behind this is creepy as hell. So he embarks on this climb with two other climbers who were all attached by a rope, with him being in the back of the group. But at some point on this climb, when the climber who was in front of him went to go pull on the rope so they could, tug him in, they realized that the rope had gone completely slack. And when they do pull in the rope, they see that the rope was actually cut clean, which would indicate that Eric had actually cut himself off the rope and away from the group for an unknown reason. And once they knew he was gone, they alert, rangers, and a search party goes up there for 3 days, but they never found him. They only found his backpack and no footprints. Whatever caused him to cut himself off that rope and separate from the group remains an unknown, as he has never been found. Growing up watching Courage the Cowardly Dog, did you know that it was based off of a real place called Middle of Nowhere, New Mexico? The concept was inspired by this rural location where feasibly there are very few people still left, but it did fixate on an elderly couple that did go missing after they started to report strange sightings. Although never proven, it's believed that their disappearance, as well as countless others, was at the hands of David Parker Ray, who was a notorious assailant who lived just 7 miles away from here. The couple was never found, but their dog was left behind, which bore the concept of Courage the Cowardly Dog and his elderly caretakers. This is one of the worst cases of Munchausen's I have ever heard of. There is allegedly a woman who picked at her legs all the way through to the bone. I'm cautioning an extreme warning for this one. We know about Munchausen's by proxy, but Munchausen's can be applicable to oneself if you are intentionally perpetuating your own injury or illness to remain unwell. A former ballerina presented with horrific sores on her legs on social media, claiming to have a rare illness. But her followers on social media chimed in when they noted that these wounds looked self-inflicted, but nonetheless, she continued to pick through skin, through muscle, through nerves, and eventually down to her bone. But by the time the infection became emergent, doctors could not save her legs, as she had intentionally destroyed them. She had ensured that they would both become infected. She now lives as a double amputee and insists that this was a mysterious illness out of her control. Munchausen's is a mental health crisis, but there are resources for help and there are roads to recovery. Thank you to everybody who requested repeatedly that I cover the case of Lizzie Borden. After reading about it, I now understand why. Lizzie Borden was a young woman who was living out with her family in Massachusetts in the 1800s. Her mother had actually died, so she was living with her father and stepmother, and tensions ran extremely high in that house. But what made this case famous was August 4th, 1892, when sometime that morning, Lizzie's father and stepmother were brutally ended, her father being on this couch. Her stepmother received 40 strikes to the skull using a hatchet axe, and her father 41. Lizzie is arrested, and there are a ton of counterclaims of people saying they heard her laughing at the time this happened, other people in the house who said they didn't hear a thing. But she was eventually found not guilty by a jury of 12 men due to the fact that there was no physical evidence that could link her to these crimes. She was given her freedom, and the Borden house still remains to this day as a horrifying staple of Fall Rivers, Massachusetts. 3 scary movies that were based on real stories, and the third one is absolutely insane. Scream just made yet another resurgence of the franchise as kind of the campy classic in the horror genre. But this whole franchise actually has some truth behind the original concept, as it was inspired by the Gainesville Ripper of Florida, who took the lives of 5 students seemingly for no motive other than just to gamify the killings. He even posed the bodies so that when others found them, it was horrifying. Child's Play is a movie that I would have never imagined to have had some truth behind it. But the original concept that inspired the script was actually based on Robert the Doll, which was gifted to a child in the early 1900s by a woman who practiced voodoo, and people claimed this doll could walk and talk on its own. Open water is a nightmare concept of a couple that gets left behind on a boating tour in shark-infested waters. But this exact scenario did happen to a real-life couple who were also left in shark-infested waters. Kaylin Lauder was a 30-year-old social worker who was living out in Utah in 2014. She ends up hitting a rough patch after being laid off from her job, but was regularly looking for work until her behavior suddenly shifted. Without any history of mental illness or abusing 911, she ends up making a series of emergency calls where she's claiming that there are people outside of her condo at her door. But when police arrived, there's nobody there. Even stranger, the following morning, she's captured on the security camera outside of her condo where she's standing in the rain, crying, talking to someone who's not there. She then runs from the parking lot barefoot for an unknown reason, and this was the last time she was ever caught on camera. Months later, her body was discovered hidden under a bridge 5 miles away from her last known whereabouts, but here's the eerie part. A medical examination could not determine what happened to her. She had no injuries to the body and no substances that could explain the behavior. And during that 5-mile journey, not a single person claimed to see her. This conspiracy has always freaked me out. Allegedly, when Avril Lavigne debuted in 2002, she found the fame incredibly difficult to handle, so her label employed a look-alike. An actress named Melissa Vandella, who was typically used for paparazzi diversions as well as red carpet events. But it was reported that around this time, Avril Lavigne ended things due to severe depression, but a record label, having already invested millions of dollars, still did own the commercial name Avril Lavigne. The theory being that Melissa Vandella was then trained and employed to step into her place full time and just assumed this role of Avril. But the reason people believe this theory is that they've mostly spotted the key differences in just how much Avril has changed between 03 and 04. Physically, yes, but even her handwriting seemed to change, and the most perplexing being her speaking voice.
I want to be singing someone else's lyrics. I want to be singing mine and what came from my heart and my opinions and how I believe and how I think.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here for the grand opening of Koi. It's my favorite restaurant. My favorite sushi restaurant in the world.
But what freaks me out the most about this is that if you look up articles about this conspiracy when it first broke like 5 years ago, most of the videos and pictures supporting the story have actually since been deleted. So if there's no truth to it, why? In 2010, 20-year-old Amber Tuckero decided she wanted to go into the city to do some solo exploring on a night out. So she hitchhiked a ride with an unknown man who said he would take her into the city of Edmonton, but Amber would never make it. While on the drive, she suddenly realized that something was very wrong when he started driving through back roads. She had no cell service but managed to record this audio on her phone. It is the only evidence we have of some of her final moments.
We're not going into the city, are we? No, we're not. And what are these roads going to? 50th Street. 50th Street. Are you sure? Absolutely. No, where are we going? 50th Street. 50th Street. 50th Street. East, right? East.
Exactly how old would you guess this woman is? For those who are unfamiliar, the Death House landlady went down in Sacramento's history as one of the most unusual serial killers the county had ever seen. Her name was Dorothea Puente. She was a woman with a traumatic childhood who exhibited tendencies of a pathological liar. Around the 70s, she reinvents herself as this sort of older Christian woman who would run a boarding house where she takes care of the elderly. But Dorothea was only in her 50s and was intentionally making herself look older to upkeep this image as the harmless caregiver. But when police came knocking to investigate a tenant who had gone missing, they noticed that her garden had all fresh soil. Upon inspecting a little further, they uncovered the remains of 8 rotting bodies. These were tenants that Dorothea had given sleeping pills to and buried, and then still collected their government benefits, making her one of the most sly killers in Sacramento's history. The unsolved final footage of Lars Mittank is just as chilling as it is confusing. But the story really starts back in 2014. This is 28-year-old Lars, and he ends up taking a trip to Bulgaria with his friends. So at a night out at a bar, he ends up getting into an argument with several unknown men, which results in a fight, and he ends up rupturing his eardrum. Because of his injury, he insists that his friends are going to fly back without him and he's just going to stay behind and recover for a few days. But as soon as he's left behind in the hotel, this is when the strange and erratic behavior becomes almost immediate, and he starts becoming paranoid and thinks there are men following him. Which then leads us to this final footage where we see Lars arriving at the airport, presuming that he's there to catch a flight because he has luggage in hand, but then for an unknown reason we see him sprinting out of the terminal into the parking lot, and this was the last time he has ever been seen on camera. To this day, what Lars thought he was running from or where he went remains a complete unknown in this case. The mystery of Kate Yup is still very much unexplained. Kate Yup was a YouTuber who would make mukbang videos where she would eat excessive amounts of food. These were not normal videos. Kate was eating aggressively fast, almost like she was being starved or she was forced. She also wears a blindfold in every video, so her identity is completely unknown. But viewers became seriously concerned when they started to notice warning signs that Kate might be under someone's control. There are indicators that there was somebody else in that room with her while she's eating all of this food. You can hear him breathing in the background of her videos. She's eating so fast that in one video she actually chips her teeth, and when she shows them to the camera, these are teeth that are rotted. But the most compelling evidence to support that Kate Yup could be a victim of trafficking are the cryptic messages that she's left in the text editing of her videos. Since this all kind of blew up in the media, the channel has gone totally dark and there hasn't been a new video in years. Videos like these that claim to capture urban legends on camera just freak me out so bad. The story behind this is the legend of Tata Duende, which is a mythical creature most commonly found in Mayan folklore. But the generational stories of these things just take on like a whole new meaning of creepy when people start claiming to capture them on film. 3 of the scariest bridges in America and why you should avoid them at all costs. The Captain William Moore Bridge is a semi-traditional suspension bridge located in a scenic gorge in Alaska. But what makes this bridge terrifying is that it was built on an active earthquake fault. So to keep the bridge from falling apart in the event of an earthquake, only one side of it is balanced and fully secured, meaning the bridge can rock in either direction. The Royal Gorge Bridge is definitely a scenic Colorado view for anyone who can handle its height. What freaks people out about this bridge is that the guardrails do get pretty short at certain parts, meaning the 1,000-foot drop is something you may not want to look down during your stroll. The Deception Pass Bridge is really not too bad of a drive at face value if you ever find yourself in the Washington area. But what makes this bridge unusually strange are the increasingly high numbers of accidents and unalivings that take place here. So much so that unalivings have jumped to 15 per year and no one knows why. This is a 1940s ventriloquist doll. It's from the World War II era and it was captured on camera moving on its own. So the story behind this is that the doll is actually owned by a collector named Michael Diamond. He's a Liverpool man and a father of 2. But he noticed that the latch on the glass case kept opening night after night, so what he did was he set up a camera, assuming that he was going to catch one of his children doing it, and this was the footage he captured.